Good afternoon, good morning to all our audiences joining from outside of India. Just want to let you know that we are recording this webinar. So welcome everyone. We are very happy to have you be a part of this webinar today. I am Shilpa Aluwalia, Regional Director for Global Pro Bono with PYXERA Global India. PYXERA Global is a US headquartered nonprofit incorporated over 3 decades ago, and we have been in India for about over a decade. Our mission is to reinvent how public, private, and social interests engage to solve global challenges. Our work in India largely covers community development projects and corporate sector skill-based volunteering programs. The webinar today is important for us to understand how we can move from aspiration to achievement. We are all aware of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and be it from the corporate sector to the social sector or even academia, we all know that these cannot just be checkboxes on a list. We need to make these goals our vision, to think holistically and at a scale that will help address complex challenges. And this is even more pertinent today, while globally we battle a pandemic and India battles its second wave. What we're seeing is an increasing embrace of the social sector by the corporate sector, philanthropists and foundations, resulting in growing discomfort by those originally hailing from the social sector on what this embrace is bringing or could bring. In PYXERA Global's 9th Global Pro Bono State of the Practice Report 2, one of the trends highlights that community impact is increasingly the reason that corporates are engaging in skills-based volunteering programs. So are scale and social change mutually exclusive or inclusive? Through this webinar, we at PYXERA Global India are attempting to remove key blind spots in this debate to build a symbiotic approach to the social development sector. Today, we are privileged to have Reshma Anand, CEO of Hindustan Unilever Foundation, in conversation with Shakti Saran, Senior Fellow at PYXERA Global India. Reshma started her career at Unilever India and took a mid-career shift to the social sector that got her to work closely with rural India. In 2018, she joined Hindustan Unilever Foundation as its CEO. She is an economics graduate from the University of Delhi, an MBA from IIBM Bangalore, an Aspen India and TED India Fellow. Reshma, welcome and thank you for being here. My colleague Shakti Saran is a former corporate sector professional who crossed over to the social sector in 2017. He is an alum of India Leaders for the Social Sector and holds certificates in transformational leadership from RTL Works, in systems thinking from Cornell University, and Capra Course, and social impact management from Fourth Wheel Social Impact. Before we begin our discussion, I'm going to run a quick poll with some key questions that would feed into our discussion today. So please take some time to respond to this poll. The first question we have is to please tell us about your background and please select one option from this first question. The second question is to please choose an option below which is closest to your perception of the word impact. And the third question is the closest to your perception of the word scale. I'm going to give it another minute. Sorry. Your responses are going to help us and help us feed into the discussion today. So please respond. All right, so we are about to end the poll. And before we go ahead, I just also wanted to let you know that the Q&A is, the Q&A box is open. So if you have any questions while the discussion is going on, please post your questions in the Q&A box. Thank you. All right, so we are about to end the poll. All right, so we've had 79 people who voted. And from this, for the first question about the background, we have 42% from the social sector, NGO, nonprofit, social enterprise, social finance, Section 8 companies. We have about 35% from the private sector, 3% from the government, and university independent professionals, about 23% in the audience. The option which is closest to the perception of the word impact, we have 3% saying charity and disaster relief. We have 9% saying strengthening capacity, 15% saying ensuring better life outcomes, 52% saying creating sustainable social change, and 38% saying all of the above. For the third question, choose one option below, which is closest to your perception of the word scale. We have 54% saying magnitude, 11% saying speed, 19% saying methods, 13% saying quality, and 46% saying pace. So thank you, everybody, for sharing your feedback on these questions. And without any further delay, Shakti, I hand it over to you to get this discussion rolling.
Thank you, Shilpa. Reshma, it's a real privilege to have you on this webinar today, and thank you for being with us. Can you begin by telling us about your journey and what prompted you to switch from the corporate sector to the social sector? Reshma,
well, thanks, Shakti.
Yes.
Yeah, no surprises in terms of how it all started. Come from a conventional middle-class family where all you do is you study well, you go to a good college, and then you go through a professional program, you get your first job, and you start working, and that was how it all started. I think interestingly, joining HUL right after business school was an interesting cusp in my journey, a little too early, I must add, because I work primarily in the rural markets. And, it was quite fascinating as I traveled across the country that while we were growing as an economy, there was very little that was actually trickling down. And the stark contrast between the life that I led, in the city and the life that, most people in the country lived caused a lot of discomfort. And I think the term ovarian lottery has been used, that, what we take for granted, food on the table, a roof over our head, clean drinking water, good schools, reliable healthcare, is not the reality of millions of people in this country. And I have to say that the seed of discomfort is not just the early 20s experience, but I was also very deeply influenced by my grandfather, who was part of the freedom struggle. He was in the armed forces. He survived the 1942 invasion by the Japanese at the Andaman Islands. Then he crossed over, during partition in 1947 and saw a tumultuous life of ups and downs, And he had a very interesting principle for how do you lead a good life. When he said, when you have, choices to make, it's family above self, community above family, and society above community. So I think the seeds of, madness were perhaps sown a lot earlier. And I took, I think, a long time to craft a letter saying I would like to move on because I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. This was my first job after all. And I came back, so I, lock, stock, and barrel. I moved back from Bombay and I thought I'll figure out what I want to do. I worked across nonprofits. I've really worked in the trenches in, trying to understand how, organizations in the, in the social sector work. What are their challenges? I had to unlearn a lot. So I remember I asked my boss as I worked in a nonprofit, and he showed me a budget, and I asked him, where are the hidden zeros? And he said, there are no hidden zeros. The money that you have is what is there on the sheet. And I really took a step back saying, wow, like, how are you supposed to do so much with so little? And, from there to then, setting up my own organization, helping, micro entrepreneurs scale, to then moving and working with foundations and philanthropic organizations and helping their grantees scale. And from there, 13 years later, completing a full circle and coming back to, HUL to help the foundation. So that's broadly been the journey. I do feel in many ways that I've closed a loop of sorts, but I realized that, I don't think the journey would have come this far if I hadn't started where I had and I hadn't had those experiences.
Great. Your journey is exemplary in more ways than one. Yeah. Tell us something about HUF, Hindustan Unilever Foundation, your work, the water challenge, and why is water conservation so important?
So interestingly, we're young. We're about 10 years, in terms of our operations, and we came into existence when Paul Pullman, who's known to be an activist CEO, put out very bluntly that, as companies, we cannot just be working on issues that are half a degree of separation from the business, right? So conventionally, we have worked with communities in our manufacturing locations. We've, been there and in times of need and crisis as well. But what was very clear was that, water is going to be a challenge that will impact, billions of consumers across the world, right? And if we are not part of, the stakeholders who are, participating to solve for some of these, major issues, right? It just does not kind of sit well, right? You can't just say it's not our business to be, or it's not our concern. And I think we took a very interesting look at India's water crisis. And I call it the problem of half. The problem of half is very simple. In 10 years, we're going to have half the water we need to grow our food, to run our factories, to use in our homes, right? And cities in India are already, staring at day zero. But India's water footprint has a very unique characteristic in that 80% of it is required in agriculture. And that's where the other half of the problem comes in. So half our farmland is under water-intensive crops like rice, wheat, sugarcane, and cotton. Our water use productivity is half of any standard you might take from countries in our neighborhood to any global average. And more importantly, half our rural population depends on agriculture for a living. And that's an entire population that is at risk. And that's really where we saw the threat, and said that if we don't work towards solving for this issue or helping solve for this issue through access which is equitable, use which is responsible, and governance which is transparent, we're not really going to be playing a meaningful role in helping the country manage its water challenges. And that's really where the foundation kind of came into being. And what we're guided by is the principle that this is a common resource. It belongs to all of us. And therefore, it is going to require concerted citizen action to solve it. But the crisis apart, it's also an interesting opportunity. So we look back in history, we look at, kingdoms that did really well in India. We realize that the first thing they did was to build water infrastructure because they realized its connect, to economic well-being. A case in point is Bundelkhand, right? Today, it's a region that is synonymous with droughts and poverty. But between the Chandelas and the Bundelas, who were there between 9th and 15th, 16th century, they built a massive network of tanks that actually stored water for these kingdoms to actually have thriving economies. You go down the south, we in a state like Tamil Nadu that has no perennial rivers. There's an engineering marvel of a cascade of tanks that are 600 or 700 years old, right? And, given the fact that the monsoons were the only time that the region would have to store and save water, this cascade, brilliant scientific cascade of tanks were built precisely to make sure that there was water available all year round, and therefore also economic well-being and prosperity. So I think that intrinsically our future is linked with ensuring that we give this resource the care and concern that it deserves, and do it in a way that helps all consumers of water. And in India, farmers are a fairly significant part of the consumption piece. So it's good for us to move from showers to bucket baths and to use all of these fixtures to modulate the flow of water in our taps. But manufacturing and domestic use is about 7-8%, right? And so these are all well-meaning initiatives that we can take on. But the larger part of the issue is really in rural India. And I think that's been our effort, saying how do we bring the right, set of stakeholders together? How do we meaningfully try and solve for these issues, and to do them at scale? Because water is not really a problem you can take a sliver of and say, I'm going to solve this part and not the other.
So 2 years ago, you organized a conclave which was to discuss, impact at scale, and you had brought a whole cross section of the ecosystem, together. Yeah. So what prompted you to do this? Why is this matter so significant?
Well, I think for several reasons, Shakti. One, I don't think we understood scale either, right? So we were delivering on our metrics, but we really didn't know whether we were solving for the issue at scale or not. So one, we didn't know enough, and it was really important for us to learn from organizations that have actually done it, right? And there are plenty in the sector that have actually delivered significant scale. The second aspect is that scale was also very misunderstood. I think the dominant narrative around scale has been one about metrics, right? Coverage, size of budget, size of organization. And what we wanted to do was to actually curate a spectrum of approaches to scale. We're dealing with problems that are at population scale. And therefore, it is important that we address solutions that go beyond pilots. And it's going to be no one leader, one organization, one large endowment that can solve for it. And I think that was the thought behind actually bringing people together. And what was remarkable was that as everyone heard from peers who've done it in other sectors, it broke down a lot of preconceived notions. It was provocative. And we came out, after 2 days, recognizing that both what scale is and what scale is not. And I find that, it was probably the most, remarkable, experience that we ourselves had. And, so did our partners, because it really, shifted the way we were thinking about, our own purpose and our own path as an organization.
So there exists a growing concern, a growing apprehension among people who hail from the traditional social sector, on the corporate sector's embrace of societal challenges and programs. So is this concern real? I mean, is this something that you have experienced? And, can scale lead to social change? Can you share your thoughts? Are these mutually exclusive?
So, let me just start with, where we ended with with our, dialogue on scale. So what we came to is that scale is not that big, it's better. Scale is not one problem, one solution. Scale is not an end in itself, right? So it's doing many things many times over. And, we discovered that there were very interesting pathways to actually deliver scale, and they've been done, extensively in the social sector. Those models exist. And, it's a matter of drawing, the right inspiration from some of them, right? And a lot of those initiatives were not about operating scale, but their sheer capacity to influence. Coming back to, this concern, I think it's important to understand the underlying cause of the apprehension. I feel that it's early days. And what is challenging is that the space for open dialogue is missing. Hence, we tend to ascribe intent, judgment, perhaps hastily. we have to figure out a way that we build an appetite for diverse views, mindless judgment, and where we also get to respect each other's wisdom and experience. I want to just, illustrate this with an example, right? There's this whole perception that, especially, as the private sector comes in, we want change in a jiffy and, like overnight, impact and so on and so forth. But, just let's look at, change and the notion of time as our stakeholder sees it, right? And no one sees change in the time frame of a 5-year project. For a farmer, it's one monsoon, one season. For a pregnant woman, it's 9 months. For securing the life of a child and the mother, it's the first 1,000 days, right? And therefore, speed is often mistaken as impatience. Whereas there is another side to it, which is how do you recognize the notion of time as your stakeholders see it, right? And are we responsive to it? Are we, recognizing it, and therefore are we designing solutions based on that?
Right. So yeah, thank you for that. So really, the objective of this webinar was to engage in this dialogue, and as you can see, that we have a pretty diverse audience here with us, today. Yeah, and I hope this is just the first step. I'm sure there'll be more conclaves and discussions on this. So moving on, Reshma, in the pursuit of scale, there is fear that other considerations, such as equity, justice, and dignity, these might tend to get overlooked. So is our perception of scale flawed? Let me also rephrase my earlier question. Can social change be scaled?
Yes, and we've seen plenty of examples, and we can walk through some of them as well, right? So I mean, let's take a couple of examples. What Pratham did with Asar, right? That we actually now have a report on the state of education in India, which is a citizen-led assessment on how a child can read, comprehend, and do basic arithmetic, right?
Right.
It's done in 26 states. It's done through volunteers. And it's the defining, piece of work that anyone who's working in education would actually rely on. This is true for the social sector. This is true for corporates as they're looking at education, and also for government, right? I mean, this is a report that you just cannot ignore, and it comes out, every single year. If you look at other examples as well, I mean, Seva as an institution started off as a trade union for women in the informal sector, right? And what started off as collectivization today is, and they run a bank, they have a housing finance company, they have producer companies, the long tail of actual organizations that have been built off the foundation of what basically was a movement for women. To find, their sense of, and to discover their sense of agency. If you look at, again, smaller, let's go small, or what was typically, be considered as small in the sense of scale, right? There are models in India that have been a source of huge inspiration. Pankaj Roy's Thalonia, a lot of organizations have taken their inspiration for their models based on what they see there. The Ashodhya Samiti in Karnataka. That was actually really pivotal to the entire, work around, HIV/AIDS in India, and uniquely led, by an organization, with representation and ownership from sex workers. So I think that, so we've done impact at scale. I think it's just that, and we've seen that there are very clear examples. Again, lend a hand was also there during the conclave. The fact that vocational education is now embedded as part of high school curriculum, and I lose the number of states because they're adding states so rapidly, right? That's also significant impact at scale. So I think that if you really look at social change and the advocacy movement around the right to information, the right to education, is again impact at scale. Aruna Roy herself said that, the RTI is accessed by 60 to 80 lakh people annually. Right? And then when you look at even larger movements, I think, it's really interesting to see how Giving Tuesday has evolved It's now in 75 countries, independent chapters. In a year as challenging as 2020, they raised, I think, upwards of about $2.4 billion, both online and offline, and with almost 16 million individual donors, right? And millions of acts of generosity. So I think so if we were to kind of put the whole scale, versus impact, to rest, it can be done. If I were to look at the space of water, water, we either solve it for all or we solve it for none, right? And that's simply because we all depend on groundwater as a resource, particularly in India. And groundwater knows no political or administrative boundaries. It's a common resource. So I can't say we'll secure it for cities, but the countryside can both try. Scale inherently means that we leave no one behind. In the problem we're trying to solve for, in the region where we're working, in the communities that we believe are the most impacted. And scale is not about, handouts or service delivery. It's really about activating individual agency, which many of these examples, have proven that that's what it does, right? ASAR is a citizen-led assessment, right? SAVE as an organization, held strong by its members. The RTI and the RTV were also, outcomes of movements by people, and in fact, with not even from what I know, no other external sources of funding except member contributions, right? So I think it's really important to understand why we're doing, why we want to be in this space. And equity and agency are actually the, two sides of the same coin, right? So how are we making sure that we're giving people the tools, to kind of address some of their challenges? It becomes part of the way we build our programs. I wanted to share two simple instances, right? In East UP, we run a program where we have an all-women cadre of frontline paraprofessionals. They are para-agronomists, these are young girls, college graduates, and who work with very seasoned farmers. And it's really odd that in, patriarchal, fairly feudal East UP, you have like this band of, women professionals. And they're in some ways creating a new model of employment in rural India, because, you need this model in every village. And their contribution to their village GDP is anywhere between 6 to 11%. That's their individual, contribution alone, right? And when you ask them why they're doing it, they're very clear that, मैं अपने गांव की दशा और दिशा दोनों बदलना चाहती हूँ. So the whole, that I don't want to leave any plot untouched. I don't want to leave any family untouched. So we keep thinking that this is an issue of balance. But actually, no, I think the moment we start looking at it from a lens of harmony, that, as we're trying to solve these issues, right, the outcome will be equity, justice, and dignity in the way we're designing our solutions and the way we're designing our programs. I think we'll see this as outcomes. They're not trade-offs, at least not when, we're actually thinking about why we want to solve some of these issues. In central India, again, one of our partners is running this entire cadre of women volunteers called Jal Sahelis. They've dug wells, they've fought upper caste men, and they've been fearless in their pursuit of water for all, right? They're written about in the textbook now. They're in the curriculum, right? And so it doesn't matter whether there are 600 or 700 of them, but the fact is that they are now part of what young children will read as part of, their education experience. I think if it ends up becoming a chase for vanity metrics, you'll get some impact, you'll get lots of, coverage, but it all collapses as you, transition out or as you exit. I think if you believe that it has to work for all, and in water particularly, we see that it has to work for everyone, it cannot work for some. And we've learned that you cannot have exclusion, even by design. I think we've seen a very different momentum in our programs as
well. Thank you, Reshma. That was very illuminating. And I'm also glad that you touched upon movements as an avenue for social change. So can we dwell on this just a little more? Are movements organic? Yeah, I mean, do they reside outside the boundary of programs, or can we also design for movements?
Well, I think both, right? I mean, Giving Tuesday was a designed movement. The Women's March may have been an organic movement. You know, I think that I don't think that we're seeing movements as much as as a model for scale. Um, they are, but they're happening both. They're both happening as part of, let's say, a concerted design response, but they're also happening organically, in a lot of programs. And I think what we're also seeing across India, because the context is so different as you move from region to region, that there are localized movements. Some of them are largely, led by women, and it's probably the nature of work that water impacts women the most. But the fact that it's has it snowballed into, let's say, national scale, that has not entirely taken place. But I think the role of movements is now perhaps being looked at a little, more discreetly. But it was always felt that that they're taking place in the outside of what is a classic project where you can, have very identifiable activities and very identifiable timelines. But, movements don't work like that.
All right, interesting. Yeah, thank you. So, some time ago, a leading philanthropist had gone on record saying that their foundation was very rich in resources. As a foundation, they were very rich in resources, but in contrast to government, they were very resource poor. Yes. So does this mean that for the social sector to really achieve scale, participation of the government is essential? And if so, is the social sector really equipped today to partner with the government? Any thoughts on this?
It's so, about 15 lakh crores is allocated by the government of India on social infrastructure, which is primarily health, education, welfare programs. In our experience, we found that, our nonprofit organization partners have been very well equipped. We've seen them engage painstakingly and constructively with the state on several flagship programs, right? We've not worked on, advocacy is heavily, but on programs, it just, for example, in West Bengal, really helping a very ambitious state program on Narega to be delivered, across 5 districts, about 10,000 villagers, right? In UP, the partners that we work with are really engaging with the state on helping vulnerable households access their entitlements. In Punjab, our partners working with the Department of Agriculture to ensure that farmers who are primarily paddy wheat farmers significantly cut down their water footprint and their withdrawals of groundwater. We are learning more than anything from their experiences, how they've learned to kind of navigate the government at all levels, right? So how do you move the requisite resources at the block level? How do you do it at the district? How do you do it at the state level? So I think that it is we are learning more from our partners. This is not a space that we knew well enough, and I think with every program we are being educated by our partners in terms of the way they engage across levels, across line departments, to be able to to effectively, let's say, deliver their partnership with the state. Interestingly, most of these partnerships focus on building the capability and systems of government departments itself, right? So working with the government on helping them with decision support systems, or helping them to kind of train their frontline cadres to effectively deliver extension services or water planning, and water conservation services. So these are the spaces where we've seen civil society partnerships work well, and I think that it is one aspect of ensuring that we're able to kind of deliver impact and quality impact at scale. But if you were to step back, I think scale needs the trinity of society, government, and markets, right? It's that proverbial trinity of Sarkar, Samaj, and Bazaar to come together, right? And so it's going to take all to make it happen. There have always been these boundaries of, how you work with government. And so, there's apprehension sometimes, but we've had a very, very insightful, experience with our partners as we've worked with government. And it's not a joyride, but I think that recognizing that the person in government is also a human being, he or she also has their own, challenges,
Right.
and that you've got to figure out a way that, you're sitting on the same side of the table and making things work. I think that has been a huge learning for us as well. So it's, I think across the board, whether it's with government, civil society, private sector, the fact is that we're trying to sit on polarized positions, right? Saying,
Right.
Markets are, bad, this is good. But when you actually sit down and start talking to people, you realize that we do share some, common goals. Our methods may be different, and everybody has their own constraints. And so if you're able to kind of understand the constraints from where the person is operating from, you might be able to help them find a solution as well. But it requires enormous patience, Shakti.
All right.
It's not the easiest thing to do. I don't want anyone to think that it's a walk in the park. It isn't.
Right. No, it is not. It is certainly not. Yeah. And I appreciate where you're coming from. Yeah. If you could just spend a minute or two on SDGs, because then I have another one or two questions for you before we hand it over to Shilpa for the question and answers. On SDGs, on Sustainable Development Goals. Now, we know that these are interconnected and, and there are linkages, but often these linkages are missed by, thematic players. Yeah. So in the pursuit of scale, do we risk taking on an overly narrow approach? And, what can we do to ensure a holistic response?
First is treat a thematic area as an anchor and not a boundary condition. Because if we treat them as anchors, we can then map adjacent areas and design, programs and solutions accordingly. I mean, just as an example, water rests in SDG 6, but we have an overlap with SDG 1 on poverty alleviation because, a large part of, who we work with are small farmers, and we're helping them improve their incomes and access, social protection schemes. There's a clear overlap with SDG 5 on gender equality, because ensuring that, women farmers and women representation is there in both the governance of water as well as the use of water is, very critical. There's a very clear overlap with SDG 13 on climate change because agriculture accounts for about 25% of India's emissions, and a large part of it has to do with paddy and working on regenerative agriculture solutions, working on improving the organic soil organic content are again ways in which you're contributing to the SDG. And of course, the big one is 17 on partnerships. There's no way to do any of this without partnerships. So again, it comes down to if the narrow definition is coverage or activities or a headcount, you're unlikely to scale. But as long as you see your theme as an anchor and not as a boundary condition, I think that most organizations recognize that the SDGs are interconnected, and you will have a bit of a spider's web kind of a footprint as well.
So I wish this thinking of yours will permeate within the social sector. It's just great to hear what you just said, and that we don't lose sight of the larger picture that, every actor every actor has their limitations, but I hope we can develop this culture of being able, for all actors to see that those interconnections, those linkages. Yeah. So I just want to check with you. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about HUF? Because I have one final question for you on Unilever. Yeah. But before that, is there anything on HUF as to how you have, embraced or embarked on, pathways to scale? Anything that you would like to add that you might have missed out on, early on in this conversation?
So I think it's taken us, 2 years since that conversation in 2018 to actually, start having some of these, drivers of scale embedded in our programs. I also feel that it's been hard to change and shift mindsets as well, because there's obvious concern as you start looking at programs and solutions differently, because there is a comfort in the classic project that we've been doing forever, right?
Right.
And the classic cycle of 5-year projects. So a couple of things that have been very different is that we design for partnerships up front. We don't assume we'll discover them along the way, right?
Right.
Working with government now is more active and concerted, and not we'll make do with what we get, right? We're very invested in building the capability of first mile actors and first mile institutions. So frontline workers and frontline institutions like panchayats are integral. There's no running away, there's no escaping that, right? Because
Right.
the moment you transition capability is where you can then think of a sustainable exit. Otherwise, you're just the doer and the deliverer of service, but you've not really left the communities you work with resilient enough to kind of deal with their challenges as they go along. We're very clear that we're working with women as again lead protagonists, because you've got about 100 million women farmers in this country, and they bear the brunt of the water crisis, and
Right.
they were never part of our scheme of programming, because like
Right.
you I think started off saying blind spots, right?
Right.
So it's so those, so we've just basically said, how do you amplify scale, working with government, working with first mile actors, working with people who are the most affected by the issue, which is women,
Right.
and working through partnerships, right? And designing partnerships in a very deliberate way.
Right, right. That is so crucial, Reshma, because the social sector doesn't have the scale of a Geo or an Airtel, so it's to be able to, muster that strength through partnerships and alliances, that is bang on. Okay, I have my last question for you. Quite recently, I happened to attend, a session where Unilever had unveiled its new sustainability strategy. And this was presided by both your global leadership as well as your India leadership. Can you tell us, how does Unilever's new strategy manifest some of the things that we've discussed today?
Oh boy. So I think a couple of ways. One is in terms of just setting a very bold precedent and, eliminating exclusion. So we're saying that the entire supply chain is going to be deforestation free, or our commitment that, commitment to a living wage for all who directly provide goods and services to Unilever. So I think that is putting out a very bold precedent, which we're hoping, our peers will also, take on. I think the second bit is in terms of also setting very clear standards and benchmarks, right? So whether it's our commitments on plastics, which are extremely, public and out there, or our commitment that we, would have net zero emissions from sourcing to point of sale, the standards and benchmarks are fairly clear. And, standards and benchmarks often become a gray area, right? So I think those have also been put out there publicly. But it's not just the hard, number stuff. I think that, when it comes to, people and the kind of society that we can, support, the emphasis on diversity, on inclusion, on employability, on, designing, flexible employment models for the future. I think those combine the, the really hard-headed, commitments on sustainability with, how we're going to do it, in terms of the way we define, inclusion, in terms of the people we work with, people who work in our organizations, the people who are involved in our outer core as well, and and support, upskilling and essential skilling for the future as well. I think we're very open to have dialogue with both supporters and detractors, because it's important, as I said, to have all perspectives in. Right. And the commitment to doing it through partnerships with civil society and government has also been very loud and clear. I think it just has fueled, all of us with incredible energy, because we see that, you can be a true force for good. And right. I think the difference again is that we're not saying we're going to do it by ourselves, right?
Right.
We work with civil society organizations, we work with government. we get to hear a lot from them too, right?
Right.
And some of it is it's important for us to kind of take that as well, and always make sure that we are walking into a dialogue, open and with as few preconceived notions on intent,
Right.
assuming that we're all here to solve a problem.
Right, right. No, indeed, it was an extremely bold, strategy, and I hope other corporations across the globe, pick up a few threads from what your CEO had to share with us some time ago. And I just also have another comment. There's a colleague of mine who had actually shared this YouTube video of Dove sketches for beauty. I think it was Dove sketches for beauty. I thought that was an amazing initiative that Unilever took on the inclusion front, and even the HR initiative, which is the power of you. I think it's the power of you. Yeah, some very interesting work that you've been doing. Yeah, so terrific. So thank you so much. It's been such an engaging conversation with you. I'm going to hand this over now to Shilpa, who's going to run the Q&A session for us. Shilpa, over to you.
Thank you, Shakti, and thank you, Reshma. We have a bunch of questions, and to everybody in the audience, we're going to wrap up the webinar in exactly 15 minutes, but we're going to try and go through these questions. If there are questions that don't get answered in this webinar itself, we will be sharing your questions with Reshma, and we will also be sharing Reshma's contact information so you can send your questions over to her directly. So we have Hemant Putli, who has, his question is, socio-economic change at scale usually tends to disrupt the status quo, which in turn usually means upsetting the political balance of power. In today's highly charged political atmosphere, have you encountered such challenges? And if so, how have you overcome them?
That's a great question. I think that, what is very important to understand as well as you're dealing with issues that, can be, politically fraught, as to where is their political capital as well, right? I think, as we're looking at, issues around, underemployment and unemployment in India as well, right? If you're able to, to formalize and secure livelihoods and do that at scale, it often, does serve to political ambitions for, your, let's say, citizens to be, engaged and happy with you as well. I think what we have learned is that it's really important to choose wisely, right? And which means you choose, the states you're working with, the departments you work with, the officers you work with. I think those, decisions guided significantly by our partners have held us in good stead. We've had challenges, gender related, caste related, across the board, across program areas. And again, I think I go back to the incredible role that our partners play, because they're a very crucial bridge between conflicting interests locally. We don't have the capacity to kind of, navigate that space. But, last year itself, there have been 3 instances where they've been able to do an amazing role of building dialogue and also doing very, very localized conflict resolution, which has, diffused what could have been potentially, volatile situations. And I believe that this is one area that we don't give our, civil society partners adequate and due credit for. This is the balancing act. The rest of it is all harmony, scale, impact, dignity, justice. There's a way in which you can build it harmoniously. But this is a critical balancing act. And I do rely extensively on, how our partners understand, the local lay of the land. They understand local interests really well. They've guided us, extensively on how we should, get on with some of our ambitious programs, particularly where we've got a large number of, let's say, women who work in our programs. And my point is, I don't think we could have done without that.
Thank you, Reshma. The next question we have is from Suki Iyer. She says, you mentioned that many have already demonstrated success with water. What stops best practices being shared freely? And if they are shared freely, what's the obstacle to successful scale?
So, there are several. And they're all fairly surmountable, right? And which is the reason why we're excited to work on water, because you can actually solve for this in your lifetime. It would obviously require a great deal of, alignment of stars, etc. Knowledge is exchanged, but I don't think there are too many formalized platforms for it. And I'll be very candid, it's not an area that we support partners to do, right? It's not something that is, supported and funded as much as programmatic implementation is. And I think that this is a space where, as organizations, we need to kind of build the appetite for investing in knowledge products and knowledge platforms, because they're absolutely integral. There is no way that we can solve for some of these issues without doing it. So there is that hesitancy, and I think the onus is a lot on foundations, funders, etc., to fix this. This is a problem that you can fix. As far as happening at scale, in some, I think Narega has been an interesting game changer for at least, micro irrigation works in villages where it's been done well, it's been done really well. And I think that there are very clear models which we're now seeing getting replicated across West Bengal, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and some of the other states as well. So I think that if we are clear that we do not want to reinvent the wheel, and if we believe that there are these solutions out there that we can learn from and then, take them to, whatever scale, there should be no stopping, anyone. I feel that there is still this, desire for authorship, which if we can do without, I think we'll be very happy to, to take some of these solutions to scale. It's not just in water, though. I don't think there are too many sectors where we haven't solved for these problems at some level of scale. Right. I think the frustration is that it's not happening at population scale. And knowledge is an area that, as funders, we have to learn to have a better appetite for it.
I'm wondering if we've lost Shilpa in connectivity. It seems like, does it look to you like she's frozen?
Yes, she is. Would you like to just take on a question then?
Yes, I'll take on the question. So till she gets back. So there's a question from Venki Datla. One of the things I always wanted to find out was that in hotels, solar power heaters are there, which apparently look green, but we have to leave out 2 buckets of water every time for hot water to come. I shudder to imagine every day in every hotel room, millions of clean water being run off to get it. So it is net not green, but red. So should we bring in a legislation to bar use of solar heating for water heaters, or am I missing something?
Well, if only we could solve problems through legislation. It's so this is like, I think, one of the big challenges in in green solutions, where sometimes we actually see that it could be counterproductive. The cost is sometimes more than the benefit as well. And I think that it's again a matter of helping whoever is evangelizing a solution to know the to kind of know the pros and cons. I don't think that there's been a lot of word around regulating or metering water use, etc. I think measuring usage is important, but at the same time making sure that people have the requisite information to make informed choices is also very critical. And I think that is definitely, an area or a role which is worth considering. It's not. My point is, it's not legislation. If you're able to kind of also put the right information out there, people will take better decisions.
All right, thank you for that. I think we have Shilpa back, but I'll take one more question and then maybe hand it over back to her. So this is a question from Rasik Hulsogi, who asks, when simple villagers across the heartland understand this so well, what are the real issues when the same moves to the cities? Where are we really going? Is there hope before we go enlightening city folks?
Okay, to kind of make city folks not feel so terrible about themselves, I think that there is the governance of water is actually different, right? So in cities, you have to deal with your utilities, with your municipalities, and the models for citizen engagement with government in cities have, we still have some way to go over there. What happens, in rural, in villages today is because we've actually, entrusted panchayats with, considerable responsibilities, right, in terms of delivering, social infrastructure, and benefits, whether it's water conservation, roads, so on and so forth. The kind of engagement that we have been able to build between communities and, let's say representatives in government has actually led to, some of these outcomes that we see. I think there are very few organizations working on this bridge between, let's say, urban citizens and, the way, let's say, water is used and managed, in our cities. And there are very clear examples, and a lot of smaller towns and townships in, let's say, in Europe run through decentralized water utilities, where citizen involvement is extremely high, and management of water is also transparent. So I think it's a space where we don't have too many people working in building this critical bridge between citizens and their utilities.
All right, moving on to the next question. This is from Vandana Gupta. She's asking, if we know of the water problem, is it possible to have a huge informational promotion? Will we land in a situation like COVID and then start working on it? One set of politicians blaming the other.
So again, I think again, we have to recognize that if you have to solve for water, it's going to, take everyone to come together, including government as well. I think it's really interesting to learn from the Cape Town experience, right? Cape Town stared at day zero and was able to, postpone it indefinitely, actually. And it happened because of several measures coming together. It happened because, the government stepped in. It happened because, water for agriculture was actually withdrawn for a particular season. It happened because there was strict rationing of water to households, right? There were very clear do's and don'ts that people, had to adhere to. So it actually took place because, government, citizens, actually came together and, abided by what was required to ensure that the city, could literally stare day zero in its face. Now, they were fortunate that they had a good monsoon, the reservoir filled up, and so on and so forth. But what is quite interesting is that, Cape Town's crisis got more share of, noise than the solutions that the city adopted to overcome, its crisis. So I think again, coming back to how do you fend it off? You fend it off also by, being a little more in the know, right? The fact is that a large chunk of our water footprint in India lies in agriculture. the fact is that we do need to kind of treasure groundwater, and work towards shifting the way we use water, right? It's a behavioral thing. And this is the reason why we work extensively with farmers across the country, saying you can halve the water you use in a lot of cases and still protect your yields and still protect your inputs and still protect your incomes, right? And this is what it takes to do this stuff at scale. It's not going to happen because we expect the government will come in with a regulation, or pricing of water will happen. The fact is that water has to work for all, right? And so if we recognize where a large chunk of the problem exists, then it's going to take everyone. And this has been our big learning, right? We cannot run our programs without having the kind of bridge to government. They're not going to be successful if farmers do not participate and do not shift the way they use their water. It will not happen if we don't bring the private sector in, right? With some of the tools and technology and the solutions that can actually help farmers or government take better decisions, right? So it's going to take all of it. I think that there is going to be no magic fix, but recognizing that it's going to take all of these pieces to come together is perhaps it's not what we want to hear, but it's the only way you're able to to literally move mountains.
Okay, I think we have room for just two more questions. So I'm just going to, these will be the last two questions. There's one from Tanmay Nayak, and he's asking you, Reshma, as a grant-making organization, what is your assessment of the social sector? Yeah, has it changed in the last 4 or 5 years, or do you see it changing in the next 4 or 5 years, and in what ways?
So well, the long and short of it is yes. The sector is changing, it is evolving, and some of these changes are for the better, some of these changes are unfortunately being inflicted. So I think a couple of areas that are becoming like real big pain points are regulation, our challenges around what organizations can do, cannot do. So I think that's definitely a deterrent. But on the flip side of it, I think this community has grown. It's grown considerably, right? Look at the number of, I remember I had to kind of explain to, like a big Delhi Punjabi family as to why I chose to kind of quit HUL and, work in the social sector, right? Today, no one flinches. You're applauded for some of these decisions, right? It's a rewarding career as well. For those who choose to kind of take it on. The sector is better equipped. It's embracing technology. It's going and it's innovating. In terms of ways in which it can actually address issues which are sometimes today far more challenging than they were, perhaps 10 or 15 years ago. So I'm very enthused. I think that we wouldn't have a fraction of the kind of enthusiasm and energy that we have to work on water if it wasn't for the way our partners have also moved with us. And it's not, as I said, it's not that we embrace everything that that we do and with each other. I think that what we've learned is to have a healthy appetite for dissent, because that's important. Right? And if I were to wish for change in the next 4 to 5 years, I think it's probably required more amongst foundations and funders, to kind of facilitate some of these open dialogues, open conversations, not question intent, really see ourselves as the pairing that is required sometimes to kind of solve for difficult issues. So I think the sector is incredibly resilient. It has seen tough days, it's seen tough times, and it's bounced back as well. I do feel that we need to support better.
All All right, thank you. So one last question, and that is from Joan Anderson. Yeah, and she says, thank you for the extremely informative and inspiring examples you are sharing. Do you feel that the current COVID-related disruptions to education systems may open up spaces for young people to move straight to social action in response to need without going through traditional educational or career steps or channels? And given how connected young people are, can such initiatives sometimes reach scale relatively quickly?
I would not hazard a guess on education. It's not a space that I'm very familiar with. But if we were to just, look at what the last year um, has catalyzed, it is a lot of what we discussed in terms of movements, localized movements, citizen movements, across the board, whether it's been in terms of food aid or information, for families looking for specific, healthcare support, or figuring out how to, address the gaps in rural India and so on and so forth. It's actually been, very concerted move. I think that the fact of the matter is that people will have to. There will be an end to this tunnel, and then how are we equipping, uh, our stakeholders, communities we work with, to kind of deal with the kind of challenges that will come their way as we come down to it. On education, I would actually, reach out to organizations that are dealing with the area, because they've got their ear to the ground and they're really seeing what's evolving. Um, but overall, I think that this crisis has been very catalytic when it comes to movements across the board, young and old, urban, rural, rich and poor. I think we've seen that. How do you sustain this? And this has been always a question that I've thought about, that will it always take a disaster for us to kind of come together, or would we do it, in normal times as well? That's, again, it's a question I don't have an answer to it, but I wonder.
All right, thank you so much, Reshma. There's many other questions, but we're going to put those, collate those together and share those with you. They're questions from Sophia, Moiz, Kim, Avira, Natasha, Ira, and a couple of people who've put in more than one question. So I'm going to put all of this together and share this with you. And for those of you whose questions were not answered, we'll make it a point to have Reshma's responses, emailed to you. So Shilpa, are you there?
Homework, Shakti.
Sorry, can you say that again?
You're giving me homework. I said you're giving me homework. Yeah.
Just a little bit, because I think this the audience has been so wowed with what you had to share, and I think just to be fair to those who whose questions did not get answered, we'd love you to provide your response. Yeah, you could do it over the next few days, and whenever you're ready, we'll share it with to the people who've raised these questions. Yeah, or we may just share it to everyone who's attended. Yeah, Shilpa, are you there? We lost you in between, and I can.
Yeah, but I'm unable to turn on my video because I think that I don't have co-host rights as yet. But thank you everybody for joining. I think this has been a very interactive and insightful conversation, and your questions have made it even more interactive. So thank you for your questions. Thank you for participating in the poll. And I'm going to leave this webinar just basically on one of the key things that Reshma said, is that scale inherently means we leave no one behind. So I'm going to leave this here. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Reshma and Shakti, for getting us here together and for this discussion. Have a good evening, everybody. I've also posted the PYXERA Global's 9th Global Pro Bono State of the Practice report in the chat. Email addresses for Shakti and me and for Reshma. So that is in the chat. And so if any of you want to reach out to any of us, please feel free to do so. Thank you very much.
you. Thanks so much, Shilpa. Thanks, Shakti. Bye.
Thank
Yeah.
you, Shilpa. Thank you, Reshma. Thank you, audience. Thank you, everyone who's joined us here today. Yeah, bye for now.